Chapter 2. Nice, thought Benedict as he followed a narrow but well-worn path through the fragrant, flower-dappled jungle. He watched a river of stars burn above him, fierce and insistent, easily visible through the unfiltered transparency of an overarching plexiglass dome. With a little effort, he could imagine he was back on Earth, looking up at the midnight sky. Even though it had been decades since he set foot on his homeworld, even though he had forgotten which constellations were visible there and at what times of year. Of course, most of his colleagues hadn't seen the stars from Earth at all. They had been conceived and born light years distant from it, on one far-flung colony planet or another. Proserpina, Suriname, Samhain, Brother of Darkness. The names were romantic, even if the planets were just ore-laden balls of filth. But the colony in which Benedict labored had no exotic name because it wasn't on a ball of filth. It was close to one, if one could call orbital altitude close. However, it was tied to its host world only by a few fragile strands of gravity, which allowed it to remain in a predictable place so supply vessels could find it without trouble. Most importantly, the colony's location in high orbit gave it unfiltered access to sunlight half the day, and freedom from the pests and airborne toxins plants hated, which was why the domes had been built in the first place. Earth had gotten too crowded for growing things, especially those that could thrive only in rainforests or other rapidly dwindling environments. A sprawling, multi-domed botanical garden was an ingenious way to preserve and nurture endangered flora for a variety of useful purposes, most of them pharmaceutical, without incurring a lot of cost. That was still the thinking as recently as 30 years ago. Since that time, Earth had become less and less concerned with preserving its endangered flora, developing a host of synthetic drugs that could do the same job as natural ones. The garden colonies, all 6 of them, spread out across regulated space, became afterthoughts. Were it not for the considerable expense of dismantling and demolishing them, they probably would have been trashed. Fortunately, it was cheaper and easier to let them go on. So they remained in operation, as much a haven for people like Benedict, who didn't seem to fit anywhere else in the galaxy, as for the flora they strove to preserve. And now I don't fit in here either, he thought. Benedict had long ago grown tired of the other botanists with whom he shared the domes. A bunch of pedantic asses with no idea how boring they were. He still huddled with Philip over a Chianti now and then, but even that was largely a matter of habit. Had he known what it would be like to live in a dome colony, to look across the same dinner table at the same bland faces for years on end, he would have taken a different route in life. An Earthside job, a berth on a survey ship, anything but this. When he was younger, he thought it would be romantic to work in a lonely, faraway place. It had taken him a while, but he had learned otherwise. And now it was too late to make a change. Benedict was too old, too trapped in his routine. So he went on through the motions, doing the work assigned to him but finding no inspiration in it. And with each passing year, he surrendered a little more of himself, ceding his hopes and dreams slowly but surely to the ether. Even sex had lost its appeal to him. Given a choice between Hendrickson, Gogolak, and Angie, he had decided years earlier not to choose at all. Besides, Philip wouldn't have approved of his old school friend wallowing with his daughter. Not at all, he added silently with a smirk. Of course, that didn't leave Benedict much to live for. Just an untrammeled view of the stars, which still managed to move him somehow, and the sort of comfort one could find in the leaves of the syninjaba. Unlike most of the other specimens in the domes, the syninjaba had been found on an alien world, one called Kali, after the mother goddess of Hindu mythology. But then, Kali was the most hospitable planet humans had found to date, the only extraterrestrial environment even remotely capable of supporting Terran life forms. Otherwise, the syninjaba couldn't have been introduced to the domes, which all maintained an oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere suitable for human consumption. Benedict was grateful for that compatibility. Most grateful. A moment later, Benedict saw what he had been looking for. A proud framework of white branches, not unlike the antlers of a fully grown deer, from which hung several lush cascades of pulpy, bubble-covered black leaves. Smiling to himself, he approached the lowest and most accessible branch. Up close, the botanist was reminded that the syninjaba's leaves weren't really black, just such a dark green that they looked black from a distance. Taking the branch in one hand, he used the other to pluck from its foliage an especially promising-looking leaf, its flesh as thick and bubbly as any he had ever seen, a sure indication of its maturity. "It's got to be mature," he thought, grinning with almost childlike anticipation. Then Benedict tucked the leaf into his mouth and began grinding its flesh between his molars. Each little bubble pop released a concentrated burst of warm, bittersweet juice. It wasn't the best taste in creation, and it never had been. But then, it wasn't the taste that brought Benedict back to the syninjaba stand every chance he got. It was the fact that syninjaba leaves contained a rather ample supply of hallucinogens, and lovely hallucinogens at that. The kind that made his bones melt, the kind that turned his face into a bright, blazing sun. Everyone in the domes thought Benedict was the mellowest person this side of regulated space, and truth be told, he had always had a good store of patience. But even he couldn't have tolerated this place for so long without help from his friends. He ran his hand over another cascade of meaty black leaves. "And you are my friends," he said out loud, his words garbled by the leaf already in his mouth. "My very good friends." It was then that he began to feel the hallucinogen. It started out with a warm flush of languor in his belly, and slowly spread outward in the direction of his limbs. He congratulated himself on having made a very good choice of leaf. "I'll have to remember this branch," Benedict told himself. But even as he made the vow, he knew in his heart that he wouldn't keep it. Half the fun was in the hunt.